King Lear. Do I have to read this one? Anyway, the author's conscious and unconscious thoughts shape the characters in the plot and their works of literature.
As we looked at the subconscious thoughts of the author, we looked at Freud, which is a major player in the unconscious thought for literature, and he focused on the unconscious mind and how the thoughts of the author could influence what the plot and characters that he might not be aware of. And he also mentioned the suppression of emotions, like strong emotional trauma that an author can put in their works, but also be aware of. This is one of the only times that he, gave merit to these conscious thoughts, because he was focused on the unconscious mind. And sublimation is how the author channels the emotions that it's too hard to bring up in just everyday thing. He has to channel them into works of literature. And that's when we look at Shakespeare and how he wrote some plays. We looked at the unconscious first for Shakespeare, and he had this rough time, in early 1600s when his father died. But before that, his son actually died too, so he was going through this family loss, and he was going through this the 5 stages of grief, and probably unknowing to him, he incorporated these works these stages into 2 major works, Hamlet and King Lear. With Hamlet, there's the denial and anger present throughout Hamlet.
The denial was present by having the father from Hamlet be brought up as a ghost, and as the anger shown later by all the violence and the death and events like that.
And then in King Lear, he continues on the stages through bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And
the bargaining, where the bargaining comes up, is where basically when someone dies important to you, people have the feeling of, oh, I wish I would have rather died. And so by having the children die first, which he represents the children of King Lear, that represents that bargaining sequence where he wishes they died, but died instead of his father, which he died. Then it goes into the depression scene where King Lear, he realizes it's hopeless. These are everyone's dying. It's kind of a very depressive section of the play. And then it goes finally into acceptance. And acceptance comes up when King Lear dies. He accepts that there's nothing he could have done. That he was going to die no matter what.
Now the conscious thought of Shakespeare is brought up with sublimation, which is the rechanneling of emotions, and his son, Hamlet, which is very similar to Hamlet, was a conscious thought when he made Hamlet. And the death of his father, again, is present throughout Hamlet, with the father dying and Hamlet's similar names to Hamlet, which is his son. And then King Lear featured a brother named Edmund, which was his actual brother that was named Edmund, who died a little later after his father. So this great pain that he was causing, he needed to channel it into the works of literature, and that's how King Lear and Hamlet were written.
Alright, so here's a little bit of more on the specifics of Lear and his how Shakespeare unconsciously presented in his play. The grief that we talked about earlier, the 5 stages, were present in this. He was feeling these strong emotions, and he couldn't, I guess, he had to put them out there, but he didn't want to talk about it, so he wrote them into his literature unknowingly. And
this is also kind of shown in madness. He was so blinded by grief that he brought out a certain extent of madness in King Lear, which was showing showing the unconscious feeling he was of how great this grief was.
It could also represent perhaps the madness Shakespeare was feeling in his own life that he may not have been totally aware of or could have been aware of. And also the jester in the story represents the little bit of sanity that was left in both Lear and possibly Shakespeare.
And then the eventual death of the jester kind of represents, the King Lear's losing the grip of sanity, and that was kind of like when Shakespeare went over the edge with his grief. And that's where it leads to the violence and all these other events in the story.
Alright, so we mentioned this earlier. Edmund was Shakespeare's brother in real life, and this is an example of Shakespeare consciously putting his ideas into his play. Edmund, being his younger brother, was also went into tried to be an actor, so he was forced to live in the shadow of Shakespeare, and this is also similar to the character Edmund in the play, because he gets jealous of the treatment that his brother gets, and then goes out there, so perhaps this is how Shakespeare thought that his brother was feeling.
This song I picked right here was basically, it's kind of very joyous because, it's very like upbeat and happy, because at this moment King Lear was very, he felt so full of himself. He felt like he was king and he could do whatever he wanted to do. Right here it talks a lot about arrogance and vanity, because in a way he was blinded by his own vanity, that he threw out the only daughter who actually loved him. And it says in the song, "Vanity kills," to describe how this vanity blinded him from what the reality was going on.
Okay.
What's the picture?
King Lear is at the center of attention because the two sisters are telling him how much they love him, but Cordelia is standing off to the side because she's rebelling and refuses to tell him how much she loves him because she shows him already, doesn't feel the need to tell him that.
And those kind of relate to each other, where this was him making the mistake of just being so arrogant that he just doesn't pay attention to the one who actually cares off to the side, and he's focused on the ones who are soothing his ego. Thinks these other people love him, but it's just really he's getting his ego soothed, and it's just himself loving himself. Thank you. Kind of like we're saying, vanity kills. It's like he hurts himself. And it doesn't get pay bills. Pay bills represents it doesn't get what the things he wants done. This next song, it's much more somber. This is supposed to represent Act 2, Scene 4. Well, the other one was the first scene, you guys know, and the first act. This is supposed to represent when he was thrown out of the kingdom, that all these people he thought he loved, who he thought loved him, were really kind of just betrayed him. He was betrayed by these people who he really trusted because they soothed his ego, which, as I later pointed out.
This shows King Lear going crazy he has already been cast out, and the only person left with him is the jester, showing his loyalty and trying to keep him sane.
This kind of connects to the song because this is like he's so distraught by this betrayal that he's gone insane. He's like along with other probably genetic issues which caused him to be delusional. This is also the distraught from his daughters has made it even worse. Kind of represents right here where the daughters had no interest in the past of what they did, all the things he did for them, where he came from, what he did. Kind of represents how there's nothing left of him right now. Everything's been kind of distraught. It's just this destruction of the reality he had. And how he needs to move on and put it off instead of going to this. So it goes on, like I said, put your foot on the pedal, like that is the fact that he is so focused on what happened that he is not moving on. He was up high, and now that he's been cast down, he just is stuck in this area. He's fallen into the abyss, as I described. It's kind of like the daughters he loved. They were betrayed him, and they stole away from him. That's kind of supposed to be shown that way. It's kind of going for the same ideas I was talking about earlier. Notice the song overall has very somber tone, and as I was saying earlier, it's kind of like, once again, it kind of goes back to his ego, how it's kind of as a lot of, a friend of mine described prog rock as kind of, being a very self-centered type of music, where it's a very focused on your own problems, your own issues, and that's kind of what it's supposed to be doing right here. This protection he thought he had, but he didn't realize that his own daughters shot him in the back.
So as we mentioned before, the subconscious and conscious both play a role in an author's influence in the work, and if we use like an iceberg as the top being the conscious and the bottom being the subconscious, has playing a role in authors.
It's kind of supposed to represent how the tip of the iceberg. That's all we really can see. Like we can only understand a basic amount of the conscious and subconscious, but there's so much below that is undiscovered that we can't comprehend, and we only were able to just look at the tip of the iceberg as a whole.